5 seconds here, and then I'll tell you to go and you can start.
Okay.
Okay, we are live. Go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Alexandra Bell, President and CEO of the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists. Today's topic is near and dear to our organization. For 80 years, the Bulletin has focused on how science and scientists can help reduce global risks, and we've worked to engage the public and policymakers in that discourse. Today, though, we're watching a shift in government support for American science and scientists. For the past 8 decades, we've seen the administration invest in basic research and long-term bets at academic institutions and science-focused government agencies like the National Institutes of Health, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and NASA, to include just a few. Not only have these investments been sound, for example, every dollar NIH receives, it doubles the return in terms of economic activity. These investments are also essential to our very security as a nation. These investments, along with so many others, are facing dramatic funding cuts, and those cuts are already affecting how the overall American institution of science functions. Today, just days before the federal fiscal year starts and a possible government shutdown looming, we'll explore President Trump's vision and the stark reality facing the scientific community. Our conversation is drawn directly from the pages of our September magazine, The New World Order. Thank you to those of you who are subscribing and supporting our efforts. That edition in particular is one you certainly want to read. And thank you to all of you for supporting us. Please, if you're not already a subscriber, head to the website, subscribe to the magazine, sign up for the newsletter. It's the best way to stay informed on existential risks, and it really helps us to keep doing what we're doing. And now to welcome our two expert guests. First, we're joined by Dr. Gretchen Goldman. Gretchen is the president of the Union of Concerned Scientists. Previously, she served in the White House in the Climate and Environment Division of the Office of Science and Technology Policy, and as the Climate Change Research and Technology Director at the U.S. Department of Transportation. Next, we have Dr. John Holdren. John served as the science advisor to President Obama and the director of the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy from 2009 to 2017. He's also an emeritus professor at Harvard University's Kennedy School of Government, and has served as the chair of the National Academy of Sciences Committee on International Security and Arms Control. We really couldn't ask for better guests to discuss this critical and complex topic. To those of you watching, you can use the chat function to ask your questions. We'll be monitoring and we'll weave those in later in our conversation. So let's start by giving our audience an overview of how the federal budget feeds money directly into the research community and why it has been so important to scientific advancement over the years. John, let's start with you.
Okay, thank you very much, Alex. And let me try to be brief, although it's a complicated topic. The federal government actually funds, historically, has lately been funding about 20% of all of the nation's research and development, but much larger percentage, like 40%, of the basic research done in the country. The bulk of the remainder is funded by business. The way the federal government determines how much money it is going to spend on research and development in all the categories, basic research, applied research, and experimental development, is a multi-stage process which is started in each round by a letter from the director of the Office of Science and Technology Policy and the director of the Office of Management and Budget to all the cabinet secretaries and all the agency heads, outlining the administration's priorities that the president would like to see reflected in the budget requests. The agencies and cabinet departments ponder that guidance, and they ponder their own priorities and interests, and they produce a preliminary budget proposal which goes back to the director of OMB and the head of the Office of Science and Technology Policy, and there follows a very long process of back and forth, engaging the staffs at OSTP and the staff at OMB and the staffs in the departments and agencies. And that process ultimately results in an administration response to the agency proposals, which they can then appeal. And after appeal, the OMB director and the OSTP director meet with the president and together inform the president's final budget to be submitted to Congress. Then, of course, it's up to the Congress as to whether or not to appropriate the amounts of money that the president has requested. Generally, they regard the president's proposal as just a suggestion. They go through their own very long process. The president's science advisor, OSTP director, has the responsibility of trying to persuade the Congress to accept as much as possible of the president's proposals. And finally, there's an appropriation bill, if we're lucky. Obviously, in recent years, it's very often been a continuing resolution rather than a real appropriation bill. But that's how it happens.
And so, John, why is it important to overall scientific advancement in this country? Those investments that are clearly done in a very thorough and sort of iterative process, not just random selections of programs, but how is that helping the overall scientific endeavor in this country?
First of all, you need to remember, and I think everybody on this call probably is already aware, that advances in science and technology have been responsible for a very large part of the increases in productivity in the US economy over the years, of maintaining our international economic competitiveness, of maintaining public health, of maintaining our national security, and the government's role in the R&D enterprise, even though it's only about 20% of the total funding and 40% of the basic research funding, is to make sure that the public interest is given central attention in the R&D portfolio of the country. So the government funds, in particular, those important aspects of science and technology, which the private sector is unlikely to fund, or at least unlikely to fund to the full extent of the public's interest. And so the government does a lot of the funding, of course, of science and technology for national defense. It does a lot of the funding of science and technology for public health, a lot of the funding of science and technology for environment, for weather prediction, and so on. And the crucial thing to remember is that basic research, the smallest part of the total R&D investment, is absolutely crucial. It's the seed corn of the advances in applied science and technology, which will eventually follow. And if you allow basic research to basically deteriorate, if the funding for basic research falls, and by the way, President Trump has proposed in his 2026 budget proposal to reduce the federal funding for basic research by more than a third, by 34%, be a stunning, dramatic, and extremely harmful reduction, because that basic research is key to the long-term success of public health, of environmental policy, of economic competitiveness, of national security.
Hmm. Thanks for that, John. And we'll come back to those proposed cuts. But Gretchen, let me get your perspective on why these funds and funding and investments have been so important. And if you could link it also to how it benefits the US economy in general.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. Are so many benefits to the federal research and technology investments that have for a long time been a staple. As Dr. Holdren noted, there are very significant benefits. We're looking at estimates of for every $1 invested in research, we get $5 back or more, depending on the study you're looking at, in economic benefits and economic returns for the country. And this is it's the productivity, the private sector benefits that you get with jobs, and it's also health benefits. It's quality of life. It's security, as was mentioned. And I'd note too, there's just a lot more sort of ripple effects and side intangible benefits as well to that steady and what has historically been reliable US investments in research and technology, in terms of providing that STEM education benefits and the pipeline for economic mobility for people from all different socioeconomic statuses. It has a huge, as you know well, Alex, a huge diplomatic benefit of cross-cultural exchanges and science diplomacy elements that come from those investments. And unfortunately, what we're seeing now is sort of a gutting of that system that's sort of long been in place, and that critical piece that is the public investment and that sustained element of it too. I'd emphasize, because it's been reliably present, it allows for, over time, allowing that process of science to be fully realized, allowing researchers to build up expertise, work on tough problems for longer, and a lot of things that are harder for the private sector to fill the gap on. And so unfortunately, we're seeing a gutting of that infrastructure right now to a large degree.
Yeah. So since January, President Trump has taken steps, as has been noted, to reduce federal investments in scientific research across the board. John, why is the president doing this? And how much further is he going to take this?
First of all, the president claims that this is all about efficiency and stamping out federal support for research that doesn't meet the federal government's so-called gold standard for scientific research, which is that it has to be transparent, reproducible, peer-reviewed, and so on. That is, unfortunately, a joke. I mean, this is an administration that lies about practically everything, including many different aspects of science and technology, that has been dismantling the capacities of the federal government, and insofar as it can, the capacities of universities, which do a lot of the fundamental research that the government funds. The only aspects of the gold standard that really make sense were implemented in both the Obama administration, in which I served, and in the Biden administration, and have been ignored, just thoroughly ignored in both the first Trump administration and the second, which has been so far even worse. So what's really behind it? I'm not a mind reader, but it really seems to be of a piece with the president's desire to control virtually everything and to reshape the science enterprise of the federal government to fit his particular ideological preferences. And that means no research on climate science, very little research on environmental challenges in general, very little research on clean energy technologies, very little research on climate change adaptation, not just on climate science to understand what's happening, but on mitigation and adaptation to try to reduce the damages. Very little social science of any kind, because it's quite clear that the administration and some of its allies on the Republican side of the aisle in Congress do not believe that social science is science, in spite of the large contributions to American well-being that social science has produced over the decades. And it really is of a piece with a stance that is not only anti-science, it's anti-facts, it's anti-public information. This is a crew that has been taking down websites, closing off public access to databases of all kinds. This is an administration that has fired the head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics because it didn't like the job reports that emerged from that previously nonpartisan agency. They have fired a very large number of senior scientists across the departments and agencies with science and technology responsibilities simply because those individuals were not fervent supporters of the ideology that Trump has brought to the administration. And of course, we know that the domain of biomedical science and public health has been particularly afflicted with RFK Jr. Imposing his largely crazy ideas on the biomedicine and public health establishment. This is really a disaster for science. It's a disaster for public health. And the notion that it's about efficiency and a gold standard in science is a cruel hoax.
So Gretchen, hearing all that, you're at the helm of an incredibly large network of scientists. How is that community and the scientists you've been speaking with, dealing with this new situation and this new adversarial relationship the administration has taken to the scientific community?
It's really quite something. We have t-shirts now that say evidence-based outrage, and it feels very accurate because of the destruction that John is speaking to. And we're seeing a pretty substantial reaction from the scientific community. We've had hundreds of scientists join our science network since the start of this administration. So we are seeing that uptick in engagement and sort of interest in pushing back and standing up. And at the same time, and we're leveraging that in all kinds of ways to do everything we can to stop to what's happening, to slow down what the administration is doing, to push Congress to take more action, to sound the alarm with the public and the media and decision makers. And we're working to build independent science elements, which all of which I'm happy to get into later. But we're using that scientific network to do more. But the other point I just would emphasize in terms of the scientific community reaction is just to flag how different this is than the first Trump administration in terms of what we're seeing in the scientific community, because there's been so much more than in the first term targeting and lessening of research dollars in ways that we didn't see to the same degree in the first Trump administration. It changes a lot of people's perception and willingness to speak out, both I think at the individual level and at the institutional level, especially with the targeting of academic institutions that we've seen this administration do. I'm observing it is having a chilling effect on the scientific community and changing people's calculations about, is it worth our stepping out, our speaking up, our doing these things if they are either trying to preserve research dollars they have or maintain good relations with the administration in a world where there is such retaliatory actions taking place against anyone who disagrees with the administration. So I think that's really changing the degree to which we have that independent voice and that independent check on the administration.
Hmm. I I think we're seeing that kind of intimidation across sectors, but in the scientific sector, you can see the danger in a community that's retracting. The president claims that his policies will open a golden age of American innovation, but the rhetoric is really in tension with the reality of what these cuts may do. Looking at the public health sector, John, how will the reduced support and trust in institutions like NIH affect public health in the United States?
Well, first of all, you asked earlier, and I didn't really answer, how far might Trump go? And we can get a sense of that by looking at his fiscal year 2026 budget proposal to the Congress. He proposed to cut, as I already mentioned, basic research across the board by 34%, applied research by 38%, development by 7%. And the NIH in particular, which you've just mentioned, Alex, he proposes a cut of 40% to the budget of the National Institutes of Health. Now, the Congress may well not accept this proposal. Right now, the indications are in both the House and the Senate that they are inclined to reject a great many of Trump's proposed cuts, including the massive cut he's proposed for NIH. But the problem is we have already seen that Trump is willing to shut down programs, cut budgets, fire people, even dismantle whole agencies without the permission of the Congress. And he has been willing to misuse so many of the levers of power that exist in the government to carry out his agenda, irrespective of any contrary wishes the Congress might express. And so far, the Republican-controlled Congress has preferred to lie down rather than stand up, except in the matter of their budget bill so far. But again, I don't think we can be sure that the congressional budgets will really save the programs, the staff, the research grants that Trump wants to cut. Ultimately, people are forced to rely on the courts. But of course, the courts, as we've also already seen, are both slow, they're unpredictable, and things that end up in the Supreme Court often do not get resolved in the way that most members of the American public would probably prefer. If it's a golden age, I'm afraid it's going to be a golden age not of innovation, but of information suppression. And you have to, again, see this as a package where this is an administration that's not only going after science in the federal government and funded by the federal government, not only going after universities, he's going after museums, he's going after libraries, he's going after primary education, and he's trying to knock down all of the guardrails against presidential power over virtually everything. So it's a very dismaying picture. There are a few things that they're apparently interested in continuing to fund. One is quantum computing, another is artificial intelligence, a third is advanced manufacturing. We may see some acceleration of progress in those domains, which, by the way, previous Democratic administrations have also prioritized. But the damage in the meantime to biomedicine and public health, to environmental science and environmental protection, to climate change, to clean energy, to any pursuit of the value of diversity in science and technology, that damage is going to far outweigh any good that additional investments in quantum computing or artificial intelligence might bring.
Thanks, John. And so there's the macro level issue. The president has also sort of gotten into the weeds of some of these public health issues. Recently hosting a press conference in which he directly attacked acetaminophen, it's colloquially known by one of its names is Tylenol. Gretchen, what's behind the White House's approach here of sort of micromanaging access to medicines and sort of trying to act as a an obstacle between people and their doctors?
Right. That's exactly what it is. I mean, I think I'll answer the question. I also want to just pause so that we can appreciate how wild it is for the President of the United States to be giving medical advice directly that is unconnected to what the scientific community thinks and does and has for years and years come to consensus on. Like it was just wild to me to see that. And I think that's a good indicator of where we are in this, in that we are so under this administration detached from how we normally make evidence-based decisions at the federal level on this. And these attacks on health have been escalating with Health and Human Services Secretary RFK Jr. And that really has shown the pinnacle of it to me, that it's not just the gutting of research dollars, as we've discussed, but it's also interfering in the science advice that is given as a country, which has historically, even through the first Trump administration, in large part relied on the scientific community, the medical community, the federal advisory committee systems that we have in place to provide science advice that leverages the best available scientific information. And then those decisions are made taking into account that advice by political officials. And there's, of course, exceptions over administrations past of both parties where that doesn't work perfectly. But by and large, we have seen that process hold true across administrations of both parties and allow for the public to get science-based information about their health. And so now we're seeing that disruption, both with the marginalizing and firing of the scientific experts that normally would inform that process, and also with this direct interference in what should be agencies' decisions, right? What should be FDA decisions, CDC decisions, and not at all something the president just pontificates about at a microphone. And so I think that is really extraordinary to see, and unfortunately, I think it's going to cause a lot of harm, right? We know vaccine science, right, the public is vulnerable to misinformation about that, and that's been something the public health community has been battling for years. And this is going to create confusion. It's going to harm people, from children to pregnant people to all aspects of health, as when we should be dispelling misinformation, there's instead this active injection of disinformation. And I think the scientific community will need to step up and push back to guard against that as best we can.
Hmm. So switching gears a little, let's talk about U.S. competitiveness if government investments in science continue to diminish. Gretchen, many countries follow the U.S. model and have continue to funnel money into scientific research and emerging tech. If we fail to support science here, how quickly does the United States fall behind?
I'm very concerned about this. We were and are the envy of the world in terms of people wanting to study here, to be here, to work here in science and technology spaces, and we're just shooting ourselves in the foot with regard to this. And so I feel just very personally devastated by this. I'm sure many on the call, had that very multicultural, internationally inclusive experience in our academic pursuits. And I think back to my time in engineering school, getting a PhD, and it really was quite amazing to see just this, getting the best and the brightest from around the world and being able to work together in scientific pursuits. And a lot of people stay in this country, contribute significantly to this country, and that's really been a great model, right, for all kinds of reasons. And we're unfortunately gutting that now. And I think we're going to lose out, both in terms of those economic benefits we discussed before, but I think also in our international standing in being a leader on science and technology issues.
Hmm. So, John, digging in a little bit more, can we expect what's often been termed as a brain drain when scientists, academics leave a country en masse? And a little bit further, a refrain we've often heard is the market will take care of any lapses in the system. But perhaps you can talk a little bit about the difference in how the private sector approaches research as opposed to how the government has underpinned it in the past.
Okay, thanks, Alex. There's actually a lot there, and I did want to add to what Gretchen just said. She mentioned the advisory committees, and it really has to be emphasized that the Trump administration has dismantled many of the advisory committees that advised the Centers for Disease Prevention and Control, that advised the FDA, that advised the EPA, that advised the National Science Foundation, and those that they have not completely dismantled, they have repopulated largely with ideologues. So the Vaccination Advisory Committee, famously at the CDC, has been repopulated largely with people who don't believe the mainstream science about vaccinations. But you talked about the brain drain, and indeed Gretchen started to mention that. The brain drain works in a number of ways, and it's not just something we have to expect, it's something we're already seeing. We're already seeing some of the most productive senior scientists and researchers from American universities decamping to go to Canada, to go to Europe, to go to China, to go to South Korea, to go to Australia, and they're not coming back. The idea that many people have as well, some harm is being done now, but we'll fix it as soon as Trump is replaced. Well, he's doing so much damage that will take years and years, in some cases decades, to recover from, that it's no consolation at all that we might be rid of Trump in 2028. The the other aspects of the brain drain, besides the senior people who are already leaving, is many of the talented scientists who have lost their jobs in government or have lost their government research are seeking other employment. Obviously, they have to. And some of them are leaving the country. Some of them are getting out of science and technology. If they can't find jobs in universities, which themselves obviously have been hard hit by Trump's policies and his particularly punitive measures against universities, and if they can't find jobs in the private sector, they may open a restaurant or sell shoes. And those folks are not going to quickly be reincorporated into a resuscitated science and technology ecosystem that we will have to work on building after Trump is gone. The other aspect of the brain drain is, and again, Gretchen already suggested this, is the people who won't come. We have historically been a magnet for the best and brightest from around the world. We've let them in. We've educated them. Many of them have stayed. And by the way, while Gretchen mentioned the benefit to the country of the many who stayed, some of them who went back to their own countries after getting an advanced degree here are still a benefit to the United States because they take back with them an understanding of our system, of how innovation works here, of how democracy works, that is a benefit to international relations for decades afterwards. Having those talented and well-informed people who actually know something about this country in positions of growing responsibility in their own countries around the world. But of course, as everybody knows, the Trump administration has been clamping down on visas, and particularly for visas from people for people who want to come and study science and technology here. It is a very big problem.
Hmm.
The question is whether the private sector will fix it. The private sector is a great engine of innovation and economic prosperity in this country. As I've already mentioned, they fund about 70% of all the R&D, but they fund a much smaller fraction of basic research, as I've mentioned, the seed corn for the applied innovations that later contribute to the economy. And they don't fund as much as the public interest requires of the public goods questions like climate change, like national security, like public health. And without the government engaging robustly in those domains, our competitiveness, our public health, our national security are all ultimately going to suffer.
Hmm. So I want to shift eventually to what we might be able to do about some of what you've outlined. But first, there's an additional issue, which is it's not just reductions in funding for government research, but the administration is also reducing its role in regulations and oversight. So we've seen a rollback in environmental reporting standards and regulations, attempts to restrict regulations on emerging tech like artificial intelligence. So could you both comment on the potential dangers associated with the reduction in government oversight over these various sectors? Gretchen, why don't we start with you with a particular focus on the environment?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought this up, Alex, because I think this is something that isn't getting a ton of airtime right now, given all the things we could focus on. But it is a big problem on the regulatory and policy side because of the broader destruction of the administrative state and the gutting of agencies, because there's all these new and emerging issues that we need to be tackling. There's new environmental threats. There's of course, the urgency of taking action on climate change. And every day that we're not leveraging the government to address those challenges is another day that they worsen, and we're not addressing new and emerging threats that come in. And there I would emphasize too, I think that we're also negating our ability to tackle those things in the future, both because of the severity of the destruction, is with the endangerment finding maybe being the best example of where they're trying to inhibit our ability to even take action in the future by gutting the legal and scientific underpinning by which we do regulations to address climate change. And they're doing that across agencies, but that's going to really set us back in our ability to tackle some of these bigger problems that threaten public health and the environment. And I think the destruction of agencies to a large degree is also going to hamper this a lot. I think we're sort of used to thinking, okay, well, when a new administration comes in, we can think of these kinds of new ideas, right? We can think of this way to handle a policy that addresses the current threats. We could think about, what's sort of a faster, more innovative way of addressing this problem, but we're not going to have the ability to do that in the same way that we might have in the past because the people aren't there. The bones aren't going to be there to the same degree they have been in the past, where there was a relatively stable career federal workforce at agencies, right, at EPA, for example. But now we're seeing more severe and staffing cuts and destruction of programs and offices within them. And I think that's going to hamper our ability to do a lot of action, especially quickly on the regulatory side, even if there's different leadership in the near term.
I think Gretchen has made a lot of the right points, most of them, in fact, already, but let me just add a little texture on a couple of them. The scientific basis of regulation is being gutted at the EPA and at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, as well as at the U.S. Geological Survey and the Department of Interior. The EPA has actually been busy totally dismantling its Office of Research and Development. NOAA has been dismantling its Office of Atmospheric and Oceanic Research. These are the places that produce the basis for regulation in these crucial environmental domains where the public health is at risk. The EPA has proposed to abandon the endangerment finding, which gives the EPA the responsibility and the authority to regulate greenhouse gas emissions from industry and vehicles. This is a cornerstone of U.S. ability to address the climate change challenge in the place that matters the most, which is reducing the emissions that are driving global climate change. And the EPA has based its proposal to abandon the endangerment finding on a series of utterly bankrupt pseudoscientific arguments produced by a band of 5 well-known climate contrarians that the Department of Energy retained in order to try to undermine the scientific consensus supporting the endangerment finding. That attempt has now been rejected and indeed demolished by a study of the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine, whose report was released, I think, just last week, in which the validity of the mainstream scientific consensus on the dangers already being posed to the public welfare by climate change were underpinned and emphasized, and yet the EPA continues to push ahead with its attempt to rid itself of the endangerment finding. Many other regulations from EPA are already gone or at risk.
So, with all of that in mind, I will now ask you to turn. We've got a little bit of time left. What do we do? How do we manage this? Gretchen, one of the questions that came in is, how do scientists actually circumvent or get around these funding cuts, support each other? So can you talk a little bit about what you and networks like the Union of Concerned Scientists are doing?
I'm so glad you asked. We're trying to do everything we can and fire on all cylinders in this unprecedented moment where it's, I think, a very existential time for science in this country. So I would, in the near term, we are looking to fight back in every way that we can. As an entity that doesn't take federal research dollars, I feel the responsibility of doing everything we can because we do have that flexibility and freedom to speak up and push back and do everything that we can. So we are fighting fighting the administration in the courts on places where it is strategic to do so. We're pressuring Congress in lots of ways to encourage action there. And we're doing a lot to push in the public square in terms of documenting harms, tracking all the attacks on science and scientists that are occurring, communicating impacts, making sure the public and decision makers at all levels of government understand what's happening and why, what actions are causing some of the harms that we see on the ground. And we're doing a lot to organize scientists to fulfill these goals through our science network. And that's really important work to be down in the trenches doing now, because we know that anything we can save now is better and easier than having to rebuild it later. And while some of those strategies historically are not as effective in this new environment where there isn't quite the same independent checks on power, it's really critical, and it has been effective in some places to be able to push back and get the administration to walk back or fail to take harmful actions. And so we're down doing that. And at the same time, we need to be thinking bigger and long term and thinking outside of those traditional tactics. One element of that we've been looking at is building independent science infrastructure outside of government. So to what extent of those federal advisory committees that are being gutted and disbanded, can we rebuild it on the outside? Can we have the scientists meet anyway? Can they issue that science advice that then can be picked up by other levels of government, by state governments, and then the public can still have the information it needs to make science-based decisions. Then if and when there's a time that can be carried forth in government, they can, but in the near term, we're able to counter the misinformation, provide sort of a counterweight to a lot of the threat that's happening inside. So we've already seen this on the vaccine committee that was mentioned. There's an independent effort to do a lot of that vaccine advice in the absence of sound advice coming from the administration on vaccines. Scientists are going to meet anyway. States and academic institutions have said we are going to follow medical advice that we are going to base off of the scientific consensus. And so we have an opportunity to do that at scale across issue areas and build out independent science advice in a way that can be really impactful in the near term and potentially the long term as well. So lots they're doing. Happy to unpack it more in Q&A if there's time, but I'll stop there.
Yeah. So lots to do and important to do it. John, what's your take? What can we do in
Yeah, let me
response to
just
the
amplify on all the good things that Gretchen has just said a little bit. The first point I want to make is that people who think all we need to do is wait for the 2026 midterms and then change the composition of the Congress, I think are making a mistake. Trump is doing so much damage in the meantime that even if the 2026 midterms worked out in the way that many people are hoping, it would still take a very long time to repair the damage. Similarly, as I've already noted, we can't entirely count on the courts. I think what needs to happen is we have to work much harder to try to find a dozen Republican members of the Senate and half a dozen Republican members of the House, which is all we would need to join the Democrats and repossess, if you will, the Congress's authority over budgets and over the creation and dissolution of departments and agencies in the federal government. We need a dozen members of the Senate on the Republican side, half a dozen members of the House to give priority to their oaths of office and to the public interest over their fear of Trump. I think in getting that to happen, there's a role for everybody. Every citizen who understands what's going on and wants others to understand it can write letters to the editor, can generate social media posts, to write emails to Republican members of Congress, participate in town halls and peaceful protests. All of that stressing ways that the Trump illegal actions are harming Republican voters along with just about everybody else. Jobs, cost of living, pensions, poisonous air and water, veteran services, Medicaid, Social Security, it's all at risk. and it's at risk for Republicans as well as Democrats. Leaders in business, research, healthcare, education should reach out as their circumstances permit in order to do op-eds, interviews, speeches, letters, and meetings with Republicans in Congress and Republican influencers that you know, again, stressing how Trump actions are harming the sectors in which you work and thereby harming America's strengths and the interests of our citizens. And people active in public interest organizations, Gretchen has already said a lot about this. I think, among other things, the public interest organizations should band together to organize collective planning and implementation of measures to educate voters and to pressure the Republicans in Congress to stand up. There's enormous strength in partnerships.
That's actually a great thought to wrap us up. It's all the time we have today, but this is clearly something that needs to be discussed at greater length. I think we could keep going for a long time. Thanks to what both of you are doing in terms of making sure we're promoting, trust and discourse around, the scientific endeavor. The Bulletin will be continuing to cover these issues. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, our magazine, visit our website to stay up to date on future events. Our next discussion will actually be October 22nd, and we'll be exploring the challenges and the concept of truth in an age of artificial intelligence. So thank you all for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
Recording stopped.
Okay, we have cut from YouTube. We've stopped recording. Everybody just give us a second to turn on cameras. And Alex, John, Gretchen, it's a great conversation so far. Thank you.
Thanks. It's fun.
We had a great moderator.
You did all the work.
Yeah, it's I feel like I'm learning how to be briefer because there's so much